Welcome to this episode of the Homestead Journey Podcast 5-Minute Fridays, your weekly dose of information, inspiration, and motivation. Now, here's your host, Brian Wells.
Thank you, Bonnie, and welcome everyone to another episode of 5-Minute Fridays. On today's episode, we are talking about the importance of understanding your why. Why do you do this thing that we call homesteading? Why are you pursuing self-sufficiency, self-reliance, and sustainability? I think from homestead to homestead, family to family, perhaps even from individual to individual, our whys are going to be different. And that's okay. What's important to you may not be important to me, and what's important to me may not be important to you. It's all good, but it is fundamentally important for us to understand what is important to us, why we are doing this thing that we love called homesteading. Why is that important? Well, first of all, it's going to help keep us on the right track. As I've talked about before on this podcast, the temptation for homesteaders is to do all the things, raise all the things, grow all the things. And understanding our why is going to help us make good decisions. So when we are faced with the prospect of bringing a new animal onto our homestead, we need to understand our why to understand whether or not that animal or activity fits within our goals. So if your why for your homestead, for example, is that you want to use your homestead to generate income through a market garden, and you're just getting started with market gardening, and somebody says, hey, I've got some goats. Would you like some goats? If you understand that your why right now is that I'm going to generate revenue from a market garden, that's going to help you say, perhaps right now, goats aren't a good idea. Understanding your why is going to help you keep headed in the right direction, but also understanding your why. And I think probably this is the most important reason. It's going to help you keep going when you want to quit. Let's face it, folks, homesteading is like life. We're going to face challenges. Things aren't always going to go right. Sometimes animals are going to die, crops are going to fail. Sometimes it's going to be too wet. Sometimes it's going to be too dry. Sometimes it's going to be too hot. Sometimes it's going to be too cold. Sometimes we're going to face adversity, injury. There's just so many things that we're going to face. And if we don't understand why we're doing this, we're just going to throw up our hands and quit. There are times in the middle of the winter when I'm lugging 5-gallon pails of water to my animals that I need to understand the why behind what I'm doing. When I go to the grocery store and I see that chicken is cheap and can be bought for 79 cents a pound for quarters, I need to understand the why behind what I am doing. Now, let's keep in mind, folks, that our whys can and should change over time. As we start into homesteading, perhaps your why is that you want to grow 30% of your food. And then maybe next year, your why for doing this is I want to grow 50% of my food. Over time, our whys are going to change, but we need to understand what our why is so that it'll help us keep headed in the right direction, and it'll help us be encouraged to keep going when we want to quit. So if you haven't thought about your why, or if maybe it's been a while since you've thought about your why, I'd challenge you to sit down and just maybe write it out on a piece of paper once you figure out what your why is, and then tack it to a cork board in your kitchen or tape it to the mirror in your bathroom just to help you remember why it is that you do what you do, why you get up every morning a little early, feed some chickens, maybe weed a garden. It'll help you keep going. All right, our journey quote of the week comes from Rick Warren, and it says this: transformation is a process, and as life happens, there are tons of ups and downs. It's a journey of discovery. There are moments on mountaintops and moments in deep valleys of despair. Until next week, everybody, keep up the good work, and we'll catch you on next week's 5-Minute Friday.
Brian can be reached by emailing him at brian@thehomesteadjourney.net or by contacting him via our social media accounts on Facebook, Instagram, or YouTube. If you've enjoyed this episode and you'd like to support this podcast, we invite you to become a member of the Supporting Listeners program. For $10 a month or $100 per year, you will receive access to a community of like-minded individuals via a private Facebook group, at least one monthly live Q&A with Brian, the opportunity to participate in live recordings of the podcast, access to an ever-expanding library of helpful homesteading content, and so much more. Head on over to support.thehomesteadjourney.net for more information and to sign up today. As always, the music on this episode was provided by audionautics.com, so a big shout out to them.
And until next time, everybody, keep up the good work.